Welcome, my friends, to a new episode of Ways of Teacher Training. And in this episode, we're going to talk about a new type of input sessions. We're going to talk about a letter to a newspaper. Now, someone might ask, but why a letter to a newspaper, Shadi? What's the point? And let's imagine this scenario together. You're a teacher trainer at a school, okay? And then you have this nice teacher who's been teaching at the school for a long time. But the problem is, he's a bit sensitive. And you know he might be sensitive if you give him direct feedback or direct advice. So you decide to do that in a way that is not embarrassing and that is non-direct. So, in this kind of input session, all what you need to do is to write a letter. And this letter is to a newspaper. And in this letter, you put all those beliefs that you know this teacher has. And maybe you as a teacher trainer are against these beliefs, but they need to be there. And then candidates come in, teachers come in a session. You gave them copies of the letter. They read it and you ask them to respond to some questions. Now, of course, while responding to these questions, they will be discussing all these beliefs. And of course, among those teachers, you have this one teacher that you're focusing on, or this group of teachers that you know have those wrong beliefs that you want to change. Now, let me give you an example so things can be more practical. Let's see this letter. And look at this. Let's read it together. Sir, some teacher trainers came to our school claiming that English has to be taught only in English and that using L1 in the English classroom is a sin. I totally disagree with this. How can we teach true beginners without using L1? How would they understand? What about abstract nouns? Why should we waste a lot of time teaching them in English when we can save our time and give students the meaning in L1? In addition to this, translation activities can be really helpful in teaching grammar and clarifying structure. It can make them simply see the differences and similarities between English and L1. We can also use contrastive analysis in presenting language. So how come they say that L1 is evil? Look at this. This is a very smart letter. And why do I say it's a smart letter? Now, because it generates a lot of questions, a lot of discussions, and a lot of arguments that are out there in the field of ELT. Now, let's go through it and see the beliefs, okay, inside this letter. So we have English has to be taught only in English, and that using L1 in the English classroom is a sin. Now, that's a big discussion. This very short line is a big discussion. Is it really evil to use L1 in the English language classroom? Don't we have judicious usages of L1? Is it okay to use L1 as a medium of instruction? Now, these are all important questions that can be discussed by candidates in your session only on this point. Now let's move to another one and another belief. How can we teach true beginners without using L1? That's also a very common belief. A lot of teachers think that they can never teach true beginners without using L1. Now that's another point of discussion. Now another one. Why should we waste a lot of time teaching them in English when we can save our time and give students the meaning in L1? Again, that's another belief that needs to be discussed. Now let's move to the second paragraph. In addition to this, translation activities can be really helpful in teaching grammar. Well, that's another assumption. Are translation activities helpful? Good. And that would also stir up the discussion. Another one. Contrastive analysis. Is it good in presenting language? Does it help? Now again, so this letter can be a wonderful idea for an input session focusing on the use of L1 in the English classroom. When we should use it, when we should avoid it. And then you give the letter to your candidates, and you also accompany that letter with some questions. Questions like these. Read this letter from a teacher to a national newspaper. 2. What questions would you like to ask the writer? Write 3 or more. And 3. How would you answer him? Amazing. And after they answer these questions, they discuss together. And when they discuss together, you give them feedback. Right? Now let's see another letter. Let's read it together. Sir, I've been teaching for 20 years, and I believe that a student's errors can never be ignored. If we ignore their mistakes, then what are we teaching them? Nothing. They will go back home with these errors engraved more and more in the memory. I do believe so much in feedback and its importance. And I know for sure that some feedback has to be immediate. When my students are engaged in a speaking activity, for example, I always try to be close to them in order to interfere and correct any mistake. My students really appreciate this and feel that I'm always there to make their English better. Ha ha ha. Now that is a good letter for an input session focusing on error correction. And let's see the beliefs. So we have here, I believe that a student's errors can never be ignored. That's a very interesting point for discussion, eh? This guy seems very strict. So your candidates can discuss this. Do they agree or disagree with this? Another one. They will go back home with these errors engraved more and more in their memory. So it seems that the writer believes mistakes that are not corrected can become habitual mistakes. They can turn into bad habits. Okay, another belief. I do believe so much in feedback and its importance. I know for sure that some feedback has to be immediate. That's another assumption. Do we have different kinds of feedback, or should all types of feedback be immediate? Another very important part. When my students are engaged in a speaking activity, I always try to be close to them in order to interfere and correct any mistake I hear. That is another belief. Should we correct every mistake in a speaking activity? Now, can you imagine this letter given to your candidates, and they're discussing, they're taking notes, and then they're discussing their ideas like crazy, and you sit with them, you give them feedback, and you help them change the wrong beliefs. Wonderful. Now, what are the advantages of this type of input session, a letter to a newspaper? And I would say, number one, it's easy to prepare. Just what do you need to prepare this session? Just sit, think a bit, and write a letter, and try to put all those beliefs that might be tricky. Maybe some of them are completely wrong, maybe some of them are partially right, maybe some of them are really right. So it's up to you. But again, it's not that difficult. You don't need to create a lot of handouts, right? And this leads us to the second advantage. It's a light material input session. So you don't need a lot of photocopying. It's just a piece of paper that you need to photocopy quickly for your candidates. And it's also interesting because, your teachers know that some other people around them may be at the same school. They have this kind of thinking. And maybe they have discussed some of these points behind your back without you knowing. And it will be very interesting for them to see these beliefs popping up in a session so that they can get real feedback on this. It's also adaptable. Look at these two letters that I've shown you. One was focusing on the use of L1, the second one is focusing on error correction, and you can always change the topic in a very easy way. It is also, as I said at the very beginning of the episode, it's not embarrassing. And that's the beauty of it. If I want to correct someone, I don't have to be direct. So if someone has those wrong beliefs and he's sitting in the group, you're not pointing a finger at this person. Why? Because this is a letter written by someone that we don't know and sent to a newspaper. So that's the beauty of it. And of course, this kind of input session encourages teachers to explore and think and criticize. So it's very good for critical thinking. So my friends, thank you so much for watching this episode of Ways of Teacher Training. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, and leave a comment on this video. Bye-bye.